The secret life of a slip of the tongue. Have you ever called a teacher mom? Or, in a moment of high pressure, found yourself saying the exact opposite of what you meant? We've all been there. We laugh it off, blame it on stress or a tired brain, and move on. But what if these weren't just simple mistakes? What if they were messages from a hidden part of ourselves? Brief glimpses into a world of thoughts and feelings we never knew we had. This was the mystery that fascinated a Viennese doctor at the turn of the 20th century. His name was Sigmund Freud, and he proposed a radical new answer. Our mistakes are not random noise. They are meaningful signals. He argued that these slips of the tongue, forgotten names, and clumsy actions were, in fact, the work of an active, unseen part of our mind, the unconscious. It was a theory that would change the way we think about the human mind forever. To understand what we now call the Freudian slip, we first have to journey into Freud's map of the mind, a world as complex and mysterious as the deep ocean. For Freud, a slip, which he called a Fehlleistung, or faulty function, wasn't a mistake at all. The formal English term, parapraxis, which means another action, gets closer to his radical idea. A slip, he argued, was from another perspective a perfectly successful action. He saw it as a compromise formation, a negotiation between two warring parts of the mind. Imagine you're trying to hold a large beach ball underwater. You push down with all your might, but the ball is buoyant, constantly fighting to reach the surface. A slip of the tongue, Freud argued, is the moment your grip falters and the ball bursts through the water. From your perspective, it's a failure of control. But from the perspective of the beach ball, it's a success. It has achieved its goal. The slip is the unconscious mind's beach ball, a repressed thought that has successfully broken free. Freud's first map of this inner world was his famous iceberg metaphor, which divided the mind into three levels. The conscious. This is the visible tip of the iceberg, containing all the thoughts, feelings, and perceptions we are aware of at any given moment. The preconscious. Just below the water's surface, this layer holds memories and thoughts that aren't currently in our awareness but can be easily retrieved, like the name of your first pet. The unconscious. This is the vast, submerged bulk of the iceberg. This is not a dusty attic of forgotten memories, but a pressurized vault where feelings, urges, and traumas are actively held down because they are too painful, shameful, or dangerous for the conscious mind to handle. Later, Freud developed a more dynamic model, picturing the mind as a constant negotiation between three powerful forces. You can imagine them as a family living inside your head. The id, the impulsive, demanding baby. It operates on the pleasure principle, wanting immediate gratification for all its primal urges. It screams, "I want it now!" The superego, the strict, rule-following parent. Shaped by societal norms and parental authority, it is our moral conscience, constantly saying, "No, you can't do that." The ego, the stressed-out adult in the middle. The ego is the rational mediator, trying desperately to satisfy the id's desires, obey the superego's rules, and navigate the demands of the real world. A Freudian slip in this model is a moment when the ego gets distracted or overwhelmed. In that split second, the id's impulsive whisper breaks past the superego's censorship and escapes into the open. Freud collected countless examples of these successful failures, believing each one told a story. 1. Name substitution. A person standing at the altar with their new partner accidentally calls them by an ex-partner's name. For Freud, this is no simple mix-up. It is a devastatingly honest revelation of a true, repressed desire or an unresolved attachment that has momentarily overpowered the conscious intention. 2. Sound substitution. In a famous example, Senator Ted Kennedy, intending to praise the best and brightest, accidentally said he wanted to encourage the breast and brightest. A Freudian interpretation sees this not as a random phonological error, but as a repressed sexual thought momentarily bubbling to the surface. Third, verbal intrusion. In 2014, during a sermon, Pope Francis intended to use the Italian word caso, example, but instead uttered the vulgarity cazzo, a crude term for the male anatomy. For a psychoanalyst, this is not a random blunder, but an explosive breakthrough of the very primal, sexual energy the institution of the Church seeks to regulate and repress. While these examples are compelling, Freud's most famous and intricate case study was one he performed on himself, offering what he saw as undeniable proof of his theory's power. Freud's analysis of his own memory lapse, what is now known as the Signorelli Parapraxis, reads like a masterclass in psychological detective work. It demonstrates the intricate and, to some, incredible way he believed the mind connects hidden thoughts. The event itself was simple. While traveling in a carriage, Freud was trying to recall the name of the artist who painted the magnificent frescoes of the Last Judgment in Orvieto, Italy. The name was on the tip of his tongue, but he couldn't grasp it. The correct name was Signorelli. Instead, his mind offered two strange substitutes, Botticelli and Boltraffio. Rather than dismissing it, Freud put his own mind on the couch. He meticulously unraveled the mental threads to solve the puzzle. First, he identified the conversation he was having just before the memory lapse. A discussion about the fatalistic attitude of the Turks in Bosnia-Herzegovina toward death and sexuality. This topic made him uneasy, as it connected to the recent, disturbing news of a patient's suicide, which he had learned about in a town called Trefoi. Next, he explained how his mind unconsciously linked the innocent name Signorelli to these forbidden topics. He broke the name apart. Signor, Italian for sir, was a direct parallel to the German Herr, sir. Herr was contained within the name of the repressed topic, Herzegovina. Finally, he showed how fragments of the repressed ideas were smuggled into the substitute names his mind produced. The bow from Bosnia was inserted into Botticelli. The name of the town associated with the patient's suicide, Trefoi, appeared almost perfectly in the second half of Boltraffio. For Freud, this was the prime specimen, absolute proof that his mind had actively repressed the name Signorelli because its parts were associatively linked to the disturbing themes of death and sex. But this case became a double-edged sword. For his followers, it was a brilliant demonstration of the unconscious mind's intricate workings. For his critics, its dizzying complexity was its greatest flaw. It was a fascinating story, perhaps, but one so convoluted and constructed after the fact that it was impossible to prove or disprove. As the 20th century progressed, a new way of thinking about the mind emerged. Cognitive science proposed a far simpler, less mysterious explanation for our slips of the tongue, viewing the mind not as a theater of hidden desires, but as a complex information processing machine. The core argument of this cognitive-linguistic model is that slips are not meaningful revelations, but inevitable processing errors. Consider the raw computational power required for speech. Cognitive scientists describe it as our most complex motor skill, forcing us to select 3 words every second from a mental dictionary of over 40,000, all while coordinating more than 100 muscles. Imagine a concert pianist playing a frantic piece on a piano with 40,000 keys. Hitting a wrong note now and then isn't a sign of a hidden desire, it's a statistical certainty. Instead of a single, unified cause, this model proposes several non-Freudian mechanisms. Lexical competition. Think of your brain's vocabulary as a massive, busy library. When you try to grab one book, the name Emily, a more frequently used book right next to it, the name Rachel, might get pulled off the shelf by mistake, especially if you're rushed or stressed. This explains why an ex-partner's name, used for years, might slip out when addressing a new partner. Phonological errors. Words are made of sounds, and some sounds are very similar, like two adjacent keys on a keyboard. A slip like breast for best occurs because the sounds b and p are produced in almost the same way. Your mental fingers simply hit the key next to the one you intended. The most compelling evidence for this model came from clever laboratory experiments. Researcher M.T. Motley found he could reliably cause people to make a specific slip. By having subjects repeat sound-alike word pairs like dartboard and dustbin, he could prime their brains to misspeak the target pair, barn door, saying darn bore instead. This was a crucial finding. It proved you could create a slip using only sound-based interference, with no hidden meaning required. This research does, however, offer a bridge between the two worlds. Psychologist Daniel Wegner's theory of ironic process suggests that while Freud's mechanism, the Id, repression, may have been wrong, his core observation that anxious thoughts can disturb speech was valid. Wegner found that the conscious effort to suppress a thought, like "don't think about the electric shock you're about to receive," ironically makes it more active in the brain, and thus more likely to slip out. This model completely inverts Freud's idea of a censor. In Freud's world, the censor fails, which allows a slip to happen. In the cognitive world, a monitor system actively prevents slips, and a slip is what happens when this monitor fails. For decades, the debate between Freud's meaningful slip and the cognitive mechanical error was a battle of theories. But with the advent of modern neuroscience, we could finally look inside the living brain to find the physical machinery responsible for our speech. What we found was a network known as the Speech Error Monitoring System. Think of it as a high-tech factory's quality control department, constantly inspecting the words we are about to say. The key brain regions in this factory have specific jobs. The supplementary motor area, SMA, this is the factory floor manager, responsible for planning and initiating the words we are about to speak. The anterior cingulate cortex, ACC, this is the factory's alarm system. Known as the brain's conflict monitor, it rings loudly the moment it detects that a mistake has been made, that the word spoken doesn't match the word planned. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, DLFPC, this region provides causal evidence for self-monitoring, acting as a high-level supervisor of the whole process. The left PMTG, posterior middle temporal gyrus, this part of the network is especially interesting. Studies show it becomes significantly more active when the brain corrects socially costly taboo errors, providing the closest neuroscientific parallel to a censor. This discovery highlights the critical difference between the brain's real network and Freud's metaphorical one. The brain's speech error monitoring network is a technical inspector, not a moral priest. It doesn't care if a thought is forbidden, it only cares about accuracy. It's a system designed for precision, not for hiding desires. The heightened activity for taboo words isn't moral censorship. It's a learned response, where the brain applies extra quality control to words it knows carry a high social cost. With a physical mechanism for speech errors now identified, the final challenge to Freud's theory would come not from a laboratory, but from the world of philosophy. In the mid-20th century, the philosopher of science Karl Popper asked a simple but devastating question: what makes a theory scientific? His answer would call the very foundation of psychoanalysis into question. Popper's central idea was falsifiability. He argued that a truly scientific theory must be testable and, crucially, it must be possible to prove it wrong. A scientific theory is like making a risky bet. "It will rain tomorrow at noon" is a scientific prediction because if it's sunny at noon, the theory is proven wrong. A pseudoscientific theory is like betting it will either rain tomorrow or it won't. You can never lose, but you also learn nothing. A theory that explains everything, in the end, predicts nothing. Popper argued that the theory of the Freudian slip falls into this second category. It created a perfect, unfalsifiable closed loop. If a patient made a slip, the theory was confirmed. An unconscious wish broke through. But if the patient didn't make a slip, the theory was also confirmed. Their repression was simply successful. The system could never be proven wrong. Because of this inability to be disproven, Popper famously classified psychoanalysis as a pseudoscience. This critique was combined with a growing recognition of the lack of controlled empirical evidence, with critics accusing Freud of fabricating his results. His famous patient, the Wolfman, for instance, later publicly refuted Freud's interpretation of his case, calling it little more than propaganda. This leads to the final, paradoxical question. If the scientific and philosophical foundations are so shaky, why is the idea of the Freudian slip more alive today than ever before? The Freudian slip has become what some call a zombie concept. Scientifically contested and largely abandoned by clinical psychology, yet it thrives in our everyday language and culture. This paradox exists because the slip we talk about in daily life is not the same one Freud theorized. There is a difference between the technical, psychoanalytic definition, an error caused by a repressed wish, and the common, colloquial understanding, which is simply any verbal mistake. We use the Freudian label because it offers a more compelling story about our inner lives. The cultural fortunes of Freud's ideas have also shifted dramatically over time. In the English-speaking world, the rise of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, psychiatric medication, and the adoption of the medicalized approach of the DSM-3 in 1980 led to a steep decline in the cultural currency of psychoanalysis. Data shows a staggering 70.4% decline in the use of psychoanalytic terms in American English since their peak in the early 1990s. In France, however, where psychoanalysis remained deeply intertwined with philosophy, its prominence has remained high and stable. We are left with two stories to explain a simple mistake. One is a technical report of a phonological encoding error in a high-speed motor task. The other is a detective story about a hidden self, a gateway to our subconscious. Science overwhelmingly supports the first, but culture may forever be drawn to the second. The Freudian slip survives not as a scientific fact, but as a powerful cultural artifact, a testament to our deep and enduring desire to find meaning and not just mechanics in our mistakes.